Since we're talking about attention, is there an interesting connection to you between ADHD and memory?
Well, it's interesting for me because when I was a child, I was actually told my school, I don't know if it came from a school psychologist, they did do some testing on me, I know for like IQ and stuff like that. Or if it just came from teachers who hated me, but they told my parents that I had ADHD. And so this was, of course, in the 70s. So basically, they said, like, he has poor motor control and he's got ADHD. And so, there was social issues. So, like, I could have been put a year ahead in school, but then they said, oh, but he doesn't have the social, he doesn't have the social capabilities.
Right.
So I still ended up being like, an outcast even in my own grade. But then so then my parents said, okay, well, they got me on a diet free of artificial colors and flavors because that was the thing that people talked about back then. So I'm interested in this topic because I've come to appreciate now that I have many of the characteristics, if not, full blown. It's like I'm definitely time blindness, rejection sensitive, you name it. They talk about it. It's like impulsive behavior. I can tell you about all sorts of fights I've gotten into in the past. Just you name it. But yeah, so ADHD is fascinating though, because right now we're seeing like more and more diagnosis of it. And I don't know what to say about that.
Mhm.
I don't know how much of that is based on kind of inappropriate expectations, especially for children,
Mhm.
and how much of that is based on true kind of like maladaptive kinds of tendencies. But what we do know is that ADHD is associated with differences in prefrontal function, so that attention can be both you're more distractible, you have harder time focusing your attention on what's relevant. And so you shift too easily. But then once you get on something that you're interested in, you can get stuck. And so, the attention is this beautiful balance of being able to focus when you need to focus and shift when you need to shift.
Mhm.
And so it's that flexibility plus stability again. And that balance seems to be disrupted in ADHD. And so as a result, memory tends to be poor in ADHD. But it's not necessarily because there's a traditional memory problem, but it's more because of this attentional issue, right? And so, and people with ADHD often will have great memory for the things that they're interested in and just no memory for the things that they're not interested in.
Is there advice from your own life on how to learn and succeed from that? From just how the characteristics of your own brain with ADHD and so on. How do you learn? How do you remember information? How do you flourish in this sort of education context?
I'm still trying to figure out the flourishing per se, but education, I mean, being in science is enormously enabling of ADHD. It's like you're constantly looking for new things, you're
Yeah.
constantly seeking that dopamine hit, and that's great, and they tolerate your being late for things.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to die if you screw up. It's just nice. It's not like being a doctor or
Mhm.
something where you have to be like much more responsible and focused. You can just freely follow your curiosity, which is just great. Um, but what I'd say is that like I'm learning now about so many things, like about how to structure my activities more and basically say, okay, if I'm going to be email is like the big one that kills me right
Mhm.
now. I'm just constantly like shifting between email and my activities. And what happens is that I don't actually get the email. I just look at my email and I get stressed because I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, I have to think about this. Let me get back to it. And I go back to something else. And so I've just got fragmentary memories of everything. Right. So what I'm trying to do is set aside a time where like, this is my email time. This is my, writing time. This is my goofing off time. And so blocking these things off, you give yourself the goofing off time. Sometimes I do that. I sometimes have to be flexible, go like, okay, I'm definitely not focusing. I'm going to give myself the downtime, and it's an investment. It's not like wasting time. It's an investment in my attention later on.
Mhm. And I'm very much with Cal Newport on this. He wrote Deep Work and a lot of other amazing books. He talks about task switching as a sort of the thing that really destroys productivity. So like, switching, well, it doesn't even matter from what to what, but checking social media, checking email, maybe switching to a phone call and then doing work and then even switching between, if you're reading a paper, switching from paper to paper to paper.
Yeah.
Because like curiosity and whatever the dopamine hit from the attention switch, like limiting that, because otherwise your brain is just not capable to really like load it in, really do that deep deliberation. I think that's required to remember things and to really think through things.
Yeah, I mean, you probably see this, I imagine, in AI conferences, but definitely in neuroscience conferences. It's now the norm that people have their laptops out during talks. And, conceivably they're writing notes. But in fact, what often happens if you look at people, and we can speak from a little bit of personal experience, is you're checking email and you're like, or I'm working on my own talk, but often it's like you're doing things that are not paying attention. And I have this illusion, well, I'm paying attention, and then I'm going back. And then what happens is I don't remember anything from that day. It just kind of vanished, because what happens is I'm creating all these artificial event boundaries. I'm losing all this executive function. Every time I switch, I'm getting like a few seconds slower, and I'm catching up mentally to what's happening. And so instead of being in a model where you're meaningfully integrating everything and predicting and generating this kind of like rich model, I'm just catching up, And so, yeah, there's great research by Melina Unkefer and Anthony Wagner on multitasking that people can look up that talks about just how bad it is for memory. And it's becoming worse and worse of a problem.